Good morning. This is Shindo. Now, this is a long article I'm going to be reading from. I think it's extremely important that people either go and read this article for themselves, which you will find in the description box if you don't want to hear me read it. It's very important for us to know exactly what kind of man is about to be President of the United States. Now, back in July of last year, the man who ghost wrote Donald Trump's The Art of the Deal came out and told people just what kind of person Donald Trump really is. Now, out of anybody who knows Donald Trump, this man was, for the period of time of writing the book, very intimate with Donald Trump. Of course, he would have to be in order to write his biography. It's no surprise to those who are actually aware, people who practice awareness and people who are paying attention and don't let a lot of nonsense get in the way of their judgment of other people. Trump is ultimately interested in doing what's best for Trump. And at the eve of going into office, we need to find out just what kind of person is going to be the President of the United States in a few days. Tony Schwartz is the ghostwriter for the book The Art of the Deal. Now, I have read this book. It is actually well written. It does cast Donald Trump in a good light. And more people should read the book if they actually want to know and understand Donald Trump. Unfortunately for us as a society, we have this thing called democracy. And I say unfortunately because so many people who voted for Donald Trump were very low information voters. This should be something that you would want to do. Read a short book about Donald Trump. The first one, The Art of the Deal, came out in the 80s, so that you know what kind of person you're going to vote for. As I said, it cast him in a good light, so why wouldn't you read it, except for the fact that most people in this country are illiterate. They know how to read, they just don't choose to do it. Long article, so let me get right into it. You're going to be shocked, some of you, if you take the time to listen, okay? All you have to do is sit there and listen to me read this article to you. Understand, this man is, the idea that this man is going to be president should send chills down your spine. But we live in a country where people just don't have a hell of a lot of wisdom. This is from the New Yorker. Donald Trump's ghostwriter tells all. The Art of the Deal made America see Trump as a character with unfailing knack for business. Tony Schwartz helped create that myth and regrets it. Last June, as dusk fell outside Tony Schwartz's sprawling house on a leafy back road in Riverdale, New York, he pulled out his laptop and caught up with the day's big news. Donald J. Trump had declared his candidacy for president. As Schwartz watched a video of the speech, he began to feel personally implicated. Trump, facing a crowd that had gathered in the lobby of Trump Tower on Fifth Avenue, laid out his qualifications, saying, quote, We need a leader that wrote The Art of the Deal, unquote. If that was so, Schwartz thought, then he, not Trump, should be running. Schwartz dashed off a tweet. Quote, many thanks, Donald Trump, for suggesting I run for president based on the fact that I wrote The Art of the Deal. Schwartz had ghost-written Trump's 1987 breakthrough memoir, earning a joint byline on the cover, half of the book's $500,000 advance and half of the royalties. The book was a phenomenal success, spending 48 weeks on the Times bestseller, 13 of them at number 1. More than 1 million copies have been bought, generating several $1 million in royalties. The book expanded Trump's renown far beyond New York City, making him an emblem of the successful tycoon. Edward Kushner, the former editor and publisher of New York, where Schwartz worked as a writer, at the time said, quote, Tony created Trump. He's Dr. Frankenstein, unquote. Starting in late 1985, Schwartz spent 18 months with Trump, camping out in his office, joining him on his helicopter, tagging along at meetings, and spending weekends with him at Manhattan apartment in his Florida estate. During that period, Schwartz felt he had got to know him better than almost anyone else outside of the Trump family. Until Schwartz posted the tweet, though, he had not spoken publicly about Trump for decades. It had never been his ambition to be a ghostwriter, and he had been glad to move on. But as he watched a replay of the new candidate holding forth for 45 minutes, he noticed something strange. Over the decades, Trump appeared to have convinced himself that he had written the book. Schwartz recalled thinking, quote, if he could lie about that on day 1, when it was so easily refuted, he is likely to lie about anything, unquote. Again, this is going to be a long video, so if you prefer to read this article for yourself, it will be in the description box. It seems improbable that Trump's campaign would succeed, so Schwartz told himself that he didn't worry much. But as Trump denounced Mexican immigrants as, quote, rapists, near the end of the speech, Schwartz felt anxious. He had spent hundreds of hours observing Trump firsthand, and felt that he had an unusually deep understanding of what he regards as Trump's beguiling strengths and disqualifying weaknesses. Many Americans, however, saw Trump as a charmingly brash entrepreneur with unfailed knack for business, a mythical image that Schwartz had helped create. Quote, it pays to trust your instincts, unquote, Trump says in the book, adding that he was set to make hundreds of millions of dollars after buying a hotel that he hadn't even walked through. In the subsequent months, as Trump defied predictions by establishing himself as the front-runner for the Republican nomination, Schwartz's desire to set the record straight grew. He had long since left journalism to launch the Energy Project, a consulting firm that promises to improve employees' productivity by helping them boost their, quote, physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual, unquote, morale. It was a successful company with clients such as Facebook, and Schwartz's colleagues urged him to avoid the political fray. But the prospect of President Trump terrified him. It wasn't because of Trump's ideology. Schwartz doubted that he had one. The problem was Trump's personality, which he considered pathologically impulsive and self-centered. Schwartz thought about publishing an article describing his reservations about Trump, but he hesitated, knowing that since he cashed in on the flattering, quote, art of the deal, his credibility and his motives would be seen as suspect. Yet watching the campaign was excruciating. Schwartz decided that if he kept mum and Trump was elected, he'd never forgive himself. In June, he agreed to break his silence and give his first candid interview about the Trump he got to know while acting as his Boswell. Quote, I put lipstick on a pig, he said. I feel a deep sense of remorse that I contributed to presenting Trump in a way that brought him wider attention and made him more appealing than he is, unquote. He went on, quote, I genuinely believe that if Trump wins and gets the nuclear codes, there is an excellent possibility it will lead to the end of civilization, unquote. If he were writing The Art of the Deal today, Schwartz said, it would be a very different book with a very different title. Asked what he would call it, he answered, quote, The Sociopath, unquote. And why not get a sociopath, folks, as President of the United States? I get plenty of you sociopaths that come at me every single day on my channel. The idea of Trump writing an autobiography didn't originate with either Trump or Schwartz. It began with C. Newhouse, a media magnate whose company Advanced Publications owned Random House at the time and continues to own Condé Nast, the parent company of this magazine. Quote, it was very definitely and almost uniquely C. Newhouse's idea, Peter Onos, who edited the book, recalls. GQ, with Condé Nast also owns, had published a cover story on Trump, and Newhouse noticed that the newsstand sales had been unusually strong. Newhouse called Trump about the project, then visited him to discuss it. Random House continued to pursue with a series of meetings. At one point, Howard Comiskey, who ran Random House, then wrapped a thick Russian novel in a dummy cover that featured a photograph of Trump's looking like a conquering hero. At the top was Trump's name in large gold block lettering. Comiskey recalls that Trump was pleased by the mock-up, but had one suggestion, quote, please make my name much bigger, unquote. After securing the $500,000 advance, Trump signed a contract. Around this time, Schwartz, who was one of the leading young magazine writers of the day, stopped by Trump's office in Trump Tower. Schwartz had written about Trump before. In 1985, he'd published a piece in New York called, quote, A Different Kind of Donald Trump Story, unquote, which portrayed him not as a brilliant mogul, but as a ham-fisted thug who had unsuccessfully tried to evict rent-controlled and rent-stabilized tenants from a building that he had bought on Central Park South. Trump's efforts, which included a plan to house homeless people in the building in order to harass the tenants, became what Schwartz described as a, quote, fugue of failure, a farce of fumbling and bumbling, unquote. An accompanying cover portrait depicted Trump as unshaven, unpleasant-looking, and shiny with sweat. Yet to Schwartz's amazement, Trump loved the article. He hung the cover on the wall of his office and sent a fan note to Schwartz on his gold-embossed personal stationery. Quote, everybody seems to have read it, unquote, Trump's enthused in the note, which Schwartz has kept. Unbelievable. Quote, I was shocked, Schwartz told me. Quote, Trump didn't fit any model of a human being I had ever met. He was obsessed with publicity, and he didn't care what you wrote, unquote. He went on, quote, Trump only takes two positions. Either you're a scummy, loser, liar, whatever, or you're the greatest. I became the greatest. He wanted to be seen as a tough guy, and he loved being on the cover, unquote. Schwartz wrote him back saying, quote, of all the people I've written about over the years, you are certainly the best sport, unquote. And so Schwartz had returned for more, this time to conduct an interview for Playboy. But to his frustration, Trump kept making cryptic, monosyllabic statements. Quote, He mysteriously wouldn't answer my questions, Schwartz said. After 20 minutes, he said Trump explained that he didn't want to reveal anything new about himself. He had just signed a lucrative book deal and needed to save his best material. "What kind of book?" Schwartz said. "My autobiography," Trump replied. "You're only 38. You don't have one yet," Schwartz joked. "Yeah, I know," Trump said. "If I were you," Schwartz recalled telling him, "I'd write a book called, quote, The Art of the Deal. That's something people would be interested in." "You're right," Trump agreed. "Do you want to write it?" Schwartz thought it over for several weeks. He knew that he would be making a Faustian bargain. A lifelong liberal, he was hardly an admirer of Trump's ruthless and single-minded pursuit of profit. Quote, "It is one of the number of times in my life when I was divided between the devil and the higher side," unquote, he told me. He had grown up in a bourgeoisie intellectual family in Manhattan and had attended elite private schools, but he was not as wealthy as some of his classmates, and unlike many of them, he had no trust fund. Quote, "I grew up privileged," he said, "but my parents made it clear, you're on your own," unquote. Around the time Trump made his offer, Schwartz's wife, Deborah Pines, became pregnant with their second daughter, and he worried that his family wouldn't fit into their Manhattan apartment, whose mortgage was already too high. Quote, "I was overly worried about money," Schwartz said. "I thought money would keep me safe and secure, or that was my rationalization," unquote. At the time, he knew that if he took Trump's money and adopted Trump's voice, his journalism career would be badly damaged. His heroes were such literary nonfiction writers as Tom Wolfe, John McPhee, and David Halberstam. Being a ghostwriter was hack work. In the end, though, Schwartz had his price. He told Trump that if he would give him half the advance and half the book's royalties, he'd take the job. Such terms were unusually generous for a ghostwriter. Trump, despite having a reputation as a tough negotiator, agreed on the spot. Quote, "It was a huge windfall," unquote, Schwartz recalled. Quote, "But I knew I was selling out. Literally, the term was invented to describe what I did," unquote. Soon Spy was calling him, quote, "former journalist Tony Schwartz," unquote. Schwartz thought that, quote, "The Art of the Deal would be an easy project. The book's structure would be simple. He'd chronicle half a dozen or so of Trump's biggest real estate deals, dispense some bromides about how to succeed in business, and fill in Trump's life story. For research, he planned to interview Trump on a series of Saturday mornings. The first session didn't go as planned, however. After Trump gave him a tour of his marble and gilt apartment atop Trump Tower, which to Schwartz looked like unlived in, like a lobby of a hotel, they began to talk. But the discussion was soon hobbled by what Schwartz regarded as one of Trump's most essential characteristics. Quote, "He has no attention span," unquote. In those days, Schwartz recalls, Trump was generally affable with reporters, offering short, amusing, immodest quotes on demand. Trump had been forthcoming with him during the New York interview, but it hadn't required much time or deep reflection. For the book, though, Trump needed to provide him with sustained, thoughtful reflections. He asked Trump to describe his childhood in detail. After sitting for only a few minutes in his suit and tie, Trump became impatient and irritable. He looked fidgety, Schwartz recalls. Quote, "like a kindergartner who can't sit still in a classroom," unquote. Even when Schwartz pressed him, Trump seemed to remember almost nothing of his youth, and made it clear that he was bored. Far more quickly than Schwartz had expected, Trump ended the meeting. Week after week, the pattern repeated itself. Schwartz tried to limit the sessions to smaller increments of time, but Trump's contributions remained oddly truncated and superficial. Quote, "Trump has been written about 1,000 ways from Sunday, but the fundamental aspect of who he is doesn't seem to be fully understood, unquote, Schwartz told me. Quote, it is implicit in a lot of what people write, but it's never explicit, or at least I haven't seen it. And that is that it is impossible to keep him focused on any topic other than his own self-aggrandizement for more than a few minutes. And even then, unquote, Schwartz trailed off, shaking his head in amazement. He regards Trump's inability to concentrate as alarming in a presidential candidate. Quote, if he had to be briefed on a crisis in the Situation Room, it is impossible to imagine him paying attention over a long period of time, unquote, he said. In a recent phone interview, Trump told me that, to the contrary, he had the skill that matters most in a crisis, the ability to forge compromises. The reason he touted, quote, the art of the deal in his announcement, he explained, was that he believed that the recent presidents have lacked his toughness and finesse. Quote, look at the trade deficit with China. Look at the Iran deal. I've made my fortune by making deals. I do that. I do that well. That's what I do, unquote. But Schwartz believed that Trump's short attention span has left him with, quote, a stunning level of superficial knowledge and plain ignorance, unquote. He said, quote, that's why he prefers TV as his first news source. Information comes in easily digestible sound bites. He added, I seriously doubt that Trump has ever read a book straight through in his adult life, unquote. During the 18 months that he observed Trump, Schwartz said he never saw a book on Trump's desk or elsewhere in his office or in his apartment. Other journalists have noticed Trump's apparent lack of interest in reading. In May, Megyn Kelly of Fox News, the evil Megyn Kelly, asked him to name his favorite book other than the Bible or The Art of the Deal. Trump picked the 1929 novel All Is Quiet on the Western Front. Evidently suspecting that many years had elapsed since he read it, Kelly asked Trump to talk about the most recent book he had read. Quote, I read passages, I read areas, I'll read chapters, I don't have the time, unquote, Trump said. As the New Republic noted recently, the attitude is not shared by most U.S. presidents, including Barack Obama, a habitual consumer of current books, and George W. Bush, who reportedly engaged in fiercely competitive book reading contests with his political advisor, Karl Rove. Trump's first wife, Ivana, famously claimed that Trump kept a copy of Adolf Hitler's collected speeches, My New Order, in a cabinet beside his bed. In 1990, Trump's friend, Marty Davis, who was then an executive at Paramount, added credence to this story, telling Marie Brenner of Vanity Fair that he had given Trump the book. Quote, I thought he would find it interesting, unquote, Davis told her. When Brenner asked Trump about it, however, he mistakenly identified the volume as a different work by Hitler, Mein Kampf. Apparently he had not so much as read the title. Holy crap. Quote, if I had read these speeches, and I am not saying that I do, I would never read them, unquote, Trump told Brenner. Growing desperate, Schwartz devised a strategy for trapping Trump into giving more material. He made plans to spend the weekend with Trump at Mar-a-Lago, his mansion in Palm Beach, where there would be fewer distractions. As they chatted in the garden, Ivana icily walked by, clearly annoyed that Schwartz was competing for her husband's limited free time. Trump again grew impatient. Long before lunch on Saturday, Schwartz recalled Trump, quote, essentially threw a fit, unquote. He stood up and announced that he couldn't stand any more questions. Schwartz went to his room, called his literary agent, Kathy Robbins, and told her he couldn't do the book. Robbins confirms this. As Schwartz headed back to New York, though, he came up with another plan. He would propose eavesdropping on Trump's life by following him around on the job, and more important, by listening in on his office phone calls. That way, extracting extended reflections from Trump would not be required. When Schwartz presented the idea to Trump, he loved it. Almost every day from then on, Schwartz sat about 8 feet away from him in the Trump Tower office, listening on his extension of Trump's phone line. Schwartz says that none of the bankers, lawyers, brokers, and reporters who called Trump realized that they were being monitored. The calls usually didn't last long, and Trump's assistant facilitated the conversation hopping. While he was talking with someone, she often came in with a post-it note informing him of the next caller on hold. Quote, he was playing people, Schwartz recalls. On the phone with business associates, Trump would flatter, bully, and occasionally get mad, but it would always in a calculated way. Before the discussion ended, Trump would, quote, share the news of his latest success, Schwartz said. Instead of saying goodbye at the end of the call, Trump customarily signed off with, "You're the greatest." There was not a single call that Trump deemed too private for Schwartz to hear. Quote, he loved the attention, Schwartz recalled. If he could have had 300,000 people listening in, he would have been even happier, unquote. This year, Schwartz has heard some argue that there must be more thoughtful and nuanced version of Donald Trump that he is keeping in reserve after the campaign. There isn't, Schwartz insisted. There is no private Trump, unquote. There's not a matter of hindsight. While working on The Art of the Deal, Schwartz kept a journal in which he expressed his amazement at Trump's personality. Writing Trump seems driven entirely by the need of public attention. Quote, all he is stomp, stomp, stomp. Recognition from outside, bigger, more, series of things that go nowhere in particular, unquote, he observed on October 21st, 1986. But as he noted in the journal a few days later, quote, the book will be far more successful if Trump is a sympathetic character, even weirdly sympathetic, if that is just hateful, or worse yet, one-dimensional blowhard, unquote. Eavesdropping solved the interview problem, but it presented a new one. After hearing Trump's discussion about business on the phone, Schwartz asked him brief follow-up questions. He then tried to amplify the material he got from Trump by calling others involved in the deals, but their accounts often directly conflicted with Trump. Quote, lying is second nature to him, unquote, Schwartz said. Quote, more than anyone else I have ever met, Trump has the ability to convince himself that whatever he is saying at any given moment is true, or sort of true, or at least ought to be true, unquote. Often, Schwartz said, the lies that Trump told were about money. Quote, how much he had paid for something, or what a building he owned was worth, or how much one of his casinos was earning when it was actually on its way to bankruptcy, unquote. Trump bragged that he paid only $8 million for Mar-a-Lago, but omitted that he bought a nearby strip of beach for a record sum. After gossip columns reported erroneously that Prince Charles was considering buying several apartments in Trump Tower, Trump implied that he had no idea where the rumor had started. It certainly didn't hurt us, he said, in The Art of the Deal. Wayne Barrett, a reporter of the Village Voice, later revealed that Trump himself had planned this story with journalists. Schwartz also suspected that Trump engaged in such media tricks and asked him about story making the rounds, that Trump often called up news outlets using a pseudonym. Trump didn't deny it. As Schwartz recalls, he smirked and said, quote, you like that, do you? Again, folks, I apologize for the length of this video. I'm not going to cut it in half. There's no reason to. It's just one article. I think this is important enough. If you've listened this far, that you listen to the rest. Yeah, this is a really good insight into the man who's going to be president in 4 days. Unbelievable. This bizarro world. Schwartz said of Trump, quote, he lied strategically. He had a complete lack of conscience about it, unquote. Since most people are, quote, constrained by the truth, Trump's indifference to it, quote, gave him a strange advantage. When challenged about the facts, Schwartz said Trump would often double down, repeat himself, and grow belligerent. This quality was recently on display after Trump posted on Twitter a derogatory image of Hillary Clinton that contained a six-pointed star lifted from a white supremacist website. I did a video about that months ago. Campaign staffers took the image down, but 2 days later Trump angrily defended it, insisting that there was no anti-Semitic implication. Whenever, quote, the thin veneer of Trump's vanity is challenged, unquote, Schwartz says he overreacts, not an ideal quality in a head of state. When Schwartz began writing The Art of the Deal, he realized that he needed to put an acceptable face on Trump's loose relationship with the truth, so he concocted an artful euphemism. Writing in Trump's voice, he explained to the reader, quote, I play to people's fantasies. People want to believe that something is the biggest and the greatest and the most spectacular. I call it truthful hyperbole. It is an innocent form of exaggeration, and it's a very effective form of promotion, unquote. Schwartz now disavows the passage. Deceit, he told me, is never, quote, innocent. He added, truthful hyperbole is a contradiction in terms, yup. It's a way of saying it's a lie, but who cares, unquote. Trump, he said, loved this phrase. In his journal, Schwartz described the process of trying to make Trump's voice palatable in the voice. It was kind of a trick, he writes, to mimic Trump's blunt, staccato, no apologies delivery while making him seem almost boyishly appealing. One strategy was to make it appear that Trump was just having fun at the office. Quote, I try not to take any of what's happening too seriously, Trump says in the book. The real excitement is playing the game, unquote. In his journal, Schwartz wrote, quote, Trump stands for many of the things I abhor. His willingness to run over people, the gaudy, tacky, gigantic obsessions, the absolute lack of interest in anything beyond power and money, unquote. Looking back at the text now, Schwartz said, quote, I created a character far more winning than Trump actually is, unquote. The first line of the book is an example. Quote, I don't do it for the money, Trump declares. I've got enough, much more than I'll ever need. I do it to do it. Deals are my art form. Other people paint beautifully on canvas or write wonderful poetry. I like making deals, preferably big deals. That's how I get my kicks, unquote. Schwartz now laughs at this depiction of Trump as a devoted artisan. Quote, of course he's in it for the money, he says. One of the most deep and basic needs he has is to prove that I am richer than you. As for the idea that making deals is a form of poetry, Schwartz says, quote, he was incapable of saying something like that. It wouldn't even be in his vocabulary, unquote. He saw Trump as driven not by a pure love of deal-making, but by an insatiable hunger for, quote, money, praise, and celebrity. Often after spending the day with Trump and watching him pile one hugely expensive project atop the next, like a circus performer spinning plates, Schwartz would go home and tell his wife, quote, he is a living black hole, unquote. Schwartz reminded himself that he was being paid to tell Trump's story, not his own, but the more he worked on the project, the more disturbing he found it. In his journal, he described the hours he spent with Trump as, quote, draining and deadening. Schwartz told me that Trump's need for attention is, quote, completely compulsive, and that his bid for the presidency is part of a continuum. Quote, he managed to keep increasing the doses for 40 years, Schwartz said, after he spent decades as a tabloid titan. Quote, the only thing left was running for president. If he could run for emperor of the world, he would, unquote, and he will, folks. Rhetorically, Schwartz's aim in The Art of the Deal was to present Trump as the hero of every chapter, but after looking into some of his supposedly brilliant deals, Schwartz concluded that there were cases in which there was no way to make Trump look good, so he sidestepped unflattering incidents and details. Quote, "I didn't consider it my job to investigate," he said. Schwartz also tried to avoid the strong whiff of cronyism that hovered over some of the deals. In the 1986 journal, he described what a challenge it was to, quote, "put his best foot forward," in writing about one of Trump's first triumphs, his development, starting in 1975, of the Grand Hyatt Hotel, on the site of the former Commodore Hotel, next to Grand Central Terminal. In order to afford the hotel, Trump required an extremely large tax abatement. Richard Ravitch, who was then in charge of the agency that had the authority to grant such tax breaks to developers, recalls that he declined to grant the abatement, and Trump got, quote, "so unpleasant that I had to tell him to get out," unquote. Trump got it anyway, largely because of the key city officials had received years of donations from his father, Fred Trump, who was a major real estate developer in Queens. Wayne Barrett, who's reporting for The Voice, informed his definitive 1991 book, quote, "Trump, the Deals and the Downfall," says, quote, "it was all Fred's political connections that created the abatement." In addition, Trump snookered rivals into believing that he had an exclusive option from the city on the project, when he didn't. Trump also deceived his partner in the deal, Jay Pringer, the head of the Hyatt hotel chain. Pritzker had rejected an unfavorable term proposed by Trump, but at the closing, Trump forced it through, knowing that Pritzker was in a mountain in Nepal and could not be reached. Schwartz wrote of his journal that, quote, "almost everything about the hotel deal had, quote, an immoral cast, but the ghostwriter he was, quote, trying to find my way around, quote, unquote, behavior that he considered, quote, if not reprehensible, at least morally questionable," unquote. Many tall tales that Trump told Schwartz contained a kernel of truth, but made him out to be cleverer than he was. One of Trump's favorite stories was about how he tricked the company that owned Holiday Inn into becoming his partner in an Atlantic City casino. Trump claimed that he had quieted executive fears of construction delays by ordering his construction supervisor to make a vacant lot that he owned look like, quote, the most active construction site in the history of the world. As Trump tells it in The Art of the Deal, there were so many dump trucks and bulldozers pushing around dirt and filling holes that had just been dug that when Holiday Inn executives visited the site, it, quote, looked as if we were in the midst of building the Grand Coley Dam, unquote. The stunt, Trump claimed, pushed the deal through. After the book came out, though, a consultant for Trump's casinos, Al Glasgow, who is now deceased, told Schwartz, quote, "it never happened. There may have been one or two trucks, but not the fleet that made the great story." Schwartz tamped down some of Trump's swagger, but plenty of it remained. The manuscript that Random House published was, depending on your perspective, either entertainingly insightful or shamelessly self-aggrandizing. To borrow a title from Norman Mailer, who frequently attended prize fights at Trump Atlantic City hotels, the book could have been called, quote, "Advertisements for Myself," unquote. In 2005, Timothy L. O'Brien, an award-winning journalist who is currently the executive editor of Bloomberg View, published, quote, "Trump Nation," a meticulous investigative biography. Trump's unsuccessfully sued him for libel. O'Brien has taken a close look at The Art of the Deal and told me that it might be best characterized as, quote, nonfiction work of fiction, unquote. Trump's life story, as told by Schwartz, honestly chronicled a few setbacks, such as Trump's disastrous 1983 purchase of the New York City Generals, New Jersey Generals, a football team in the flailing United States Football League. But O'Brien believed that Trump used the book to turn almost every step of his life, both personal and professional, into a, quote, glittering fable. Some of the falsehoods in The Art of the Deal are minor. Spy upended Trump's claim that Ivana had been a top model and an alternate in the Czech Olympic ski team. Barrett notes that in The Art of the Deal, Trump described his father as being born in New Jersey to Swedish parents. In fact, he was born in the Bronx to German parents. Decades later, Trump spread falsehoods about Obama's origin, claiming it was possible the president was born in Africa. In The Art of the Deal, Trump portrays himself as a warm family man with endless admirers. He praises Ivana's taste and business skill. Quote, I said you can't bet against Ivana, and she proved me right, unquote. But Schwartz noticed little warmth or communication between Trump and Ivana, and he later learned that while The Art of the Deal was being written, Trump began an affair with Marla Maples, who became his second wife. He divorced Ivana in 1992. As far as Schwartz could tell, Trump spent very little time with his family and had no close friends. In The Art of the Deal, Trump describes Roy Cohn, his personal lawyer, in the warmest terms, calling him the sort of guy who would be there at your hospital bed, literally standing by you to the death. Cohn, who in the 50s assisted Senator Joseph McCarthy in his vicious crusade against communism, was closeted. He felt abandoned by Trump when he became fatally ill from AIDS and said, quote, Donald pisses ice water, unquote, Schwartz said of Trump. Quote, he'd like people when they're helpful and turn on them when they weren't. It wasn't personal. He's a transactional man. It was all about what you could do for him, unquote. According to Barrett, almost the most misleading aspect of The Art of the Deal was the idea that Trump made it largely on his own, with only minimal help from his father, Fred. Barrett, in his book, notes that Trump once declared, quote, the working man likes me because he knows I did inherit what I built, unquote, and that's The Art of the Deal. He derides wealthy heirs as members of the Lucky Sperm Club. Trump's self-portrait as Horatio Algier figure has buttressed his populist appeal in 2016. But his origins were hardly humble. Fred's fortune, based on his ownership of middle-income properties, wasn't glamorous, but it was sizable. In 2003, a few years after Fred died, Trump and his siblings reportedly sold some of their father's real estate holdings for $500 million. In The Art of the Deal, Trump cites his father as, quote, the most important influence on me. But in his telling, his father's main legacy was teaching him the importance of, quote, toughness. Beyond that, Schwartz said Trump, quote, barely talked about his father. He didn't want his success to be seen as having anything to do with him, unquote. But when Barrett investigated, he found that Trump's father was instrumental in his sunrise, financially and politically. In the book, Trump says that, quote, my energy and my enthusiasm explain how a 29-year-old with few accomplishments, he acquired the Grand Hyatt Hotel. Barrett reports, however, that Trump's father had to co-sign the many contracts that the deal required. He also lent Trump $7.5 million to get started as a casino owner in Atlantic City. At one point, when Trump could make payments on other loans, his father tried to tide him over by sending a lawyer to buy some $3 million worth of gambling chips. Barrett told me, quote, Donald did make some smart moves himself, particularly in assembling the site for the Trump Tower. That was a stroke of genius, unquote. Nonetheless, he said, the notion that he is a self-made man is a joke, but I guess they couldn't call the book The Art of My Father's Deals, unquote. The other key myth perpetuated by The Art of the Deal was that Trump's intuitions about business were almost flawless. Quote, the book helped fuel a notion that he couldn't fail, unquote, Barrett said. But unbeknownst to Schwartz and the public, by late 1987, when the book came out, Trump was heading towards what Barrett called, quote, simultaneous personal and professional self-destruction, unquote. O'Brien agrees that during the next several years, Trump's life unraveled. The divorce from Ivana reportedly cost him $25 million. Meanwhile, he was in the midst of what O'Brien calls, quote, a crazy shopping spree that resulted in unmanageable debt, unquote. He was buying the Plaza Hotel and also planning to erect, quote, the tallest building in the world on the former rail yards that he had bought on the west side. In 1987, the city denied him permission to construct such a tall skyscraper, but in, quote, The Art of the Deal, he brushed off this failure with a one-liner. I can afford to wait, O'Brien said. The reality is that he couldn't afford to wait. He was telling the media that the carrying cost were $3 million, when in fact they were more like $20 million, unquote. Trump was also building a third casino in Atlantic City, the Taj, which he promised would be, quote, the biggest casino in history. He bought the Eastern Airlines shuttle that operated out of New York, Boston, and Washington, rechristened it the Trump Shuttle, and acquired a giant yacht, the Trump Princess. He was on a total run of complete and utter self-absorption, Barrett says, adding, quote, it's kind of like now. Schwartz said that when he was writing the book, quote, the greatest percentage of Trump's assets was in casinos, and he made it sound like each casino was more successful than last, but every one of them was failing, unquote. He went on, quote, I think he was just spinning. I don't think he could have believed it at the time. He was losing millions of dollars a day. He had to have been terrified. In 1992, the journalist David K. Johnson published a book about casinos, Temples of Chance, and cited a net worth statement from the 1990 that assessed Trump's personal wealth. It showed that Trump owned nearly $300 million more to his creditors than his assets were worth. The next year, his company was forced into bankruptcy, the first of 6 such instances. The Trump meteor had crashed. But in The Art of the Deal, O'Brien told me, quote, Trump shrewdly and unabashedly promoted an image of himself as a deal-maker, non-parallel, who could always get the best out of every situation, and who can now deliver America from its malaise, unquote. The idealized version was presented to an exponentially larger audience, O'Brien noted, when Mark Burnett, the reality TV producer, read The Art of the Deal and decided to base a new show on it, The Apprentice, with Trump as a star. The first season of the show, which premiered in 2004, opened with Trump on the back of a limousine boasting, quote, I've mastered the art of the deal, and I've turned the name Trump into the highest quality brand, unquote. An image of the book's cover flashes on screen as Trump explains that as the, quote, master, he is now seeking an apprentice, O'Brien said. The Apprentice is myth-making on steroids. There is a straight line from the book to the show, to the 2016 campaign, unquote. It took Schwartz a little more than a year to write The Art of the Deal. In the spring of 1987, he sent the manuscript to Trump. He returned it to him shortly afterwards. There were a few red marks made with a fat-tipped magic marker, most of which deleted criticism that Trump had made of powerful individuals he no longer wanted to offend, such as Lee Iacocca. Otherwise, Schwartz said, Trump changed almost nothing. In my phone interview with Trump, he initially said of Schwartz, quote, Tony was good. He was the co-author, but he dismissed Schwartz's account of the writing process. Quote, he didn't write the book, Trump told me. I wrote the book. I wrote the book. Wow. It was my book, and it was #1 bestseller and one of the best-selling business books of all time. Some say it was the best-selling business book ever. Quote, it is not. Howard Kaminsky, the former Random House head, laughed and said, quote, Trump didn't write a postcard for us, unquote. Trump was far more involved in the book's promotion. He wooed booksellers and made one television appearance after another. He publicly promised to donate his cut of the book's royalties to charity. He even made a surprise trip to New Hampshire, where he stirred additional publicity by floating the possibility that he might run for president. In December of 1987, a month after the book was published, Trump hosted an extravagant book party in the pink marble atrium of Trump Tower. Klieg lights lit a red carpet outside the building. Inside, nearly 1,000 guests in black tie were served champagne and fed slices of giant cake, replica of Trump Tower, which was wheeled in by a parade of women waving red sparklers. The boxing promoter Don King greeted the crowd in a floor-length mink coat, and the comedian Jackie Mason introduced Donald and Ivana with the words, quote, "Here comes the king and queen," unquote. Trump toasted Schwartz, saying teasingly that he had at least tried to teach him how to make money. Schwartz got more of an education the next day when Trump spoke on the phone. After chatting briefly about the party, Trump informed Schwartz that as his ghostwriter, he owed him for half of the event's cost, which was in 6 figures. Schwartz was dumbfounded. Quote, "He wanted me to split the cost of entertaining his list of 900 second-rate celebrities," unquote. Schwartz had, in fact, learned a few things from watching Trump. He drastically negotiated down the amount that he agreed to pay to a few $1,000s, and then wrote Trump a letter promising to write a check, not to Trump, but a charity of Schwartz's choosing. It was a page out of Trump's playbook. In the past 7 years, Trump had promised to give millions of dollars to charity, but reporters for the Washington Post found that they could document only $10,000 in donations, and they uncovered no direct evidence that Trump made charitable contributions from the money earned by the art of the deal. Well, that, folks, is why he doesn't want his taxes looked into it. Not long after the discussion of the party bills, Trump approached Schwartz about writing a sequel, for which Trump had been offered a 7-figure advance. This time, however, he offered Schwartz only a third of the profits. He pointed out that because of the advance was much bigger, the payout would be too. But Schwartz said no. Feeling deeply alienated, he instead wrote a book called, quote, "What Really Matters," about the search for meaning in life. After working with Trump, Schwartz writes, he felt a, quote, "gnawing emptiness," and became a seeker, longing to quote, "be connected to something timeless and essential, more real." Schwartz told me that he decided to pledge all royalties from the sales of The Art of the Deal in 2016 to pointedly chosen charities: the National Immigration Law Center, Human Rights Watch, the Center for Victims of Torture, the National Immigration Forum, and the Torah Justice Center. He doesn't feel that the gesture absolves him. Quote, "I'll carry this until the end of my life," he said. "There's no writing it. But I like the idea that more copies that The Art of the Deal sells, the more money I can donate to people whose rights Trump seeks to abridge," unquote. Schwartz expected Trump to attack him for speaking out, and he was correct. Informed that Schwartz had made critical remarks about him and wouldn't be voting for him, Trump said, quote, "He's probably just doing it for the publicity," he said. "Wow, that's a great disloyalty because I made Tony rich. He owes a lot to me. I helped him when he didn't have 2 cents in his pocket. It's great disloyalty. I guess he thinks it's good for him, but he'll find it's not good for him," unquote. Wow. Minutes after Trump got off the phone with me, Schwartz's cell phone rang. Quote, "I hear you're not voting for me," unquote, Trump said. Quote, "I just talked to the New Yorker, which, by the way, is a failing magazine that no one reads, and I heard you were critical of me," unquote. No one's reading anything. Folks, no one reads anything anymore. "You're running for president," Schwartz said. "I disagree with a lot of what you're saying." "That's your right." It's Trump. "That's your," quote, "that's your right, but then you should have just remained silent. I just want to tell you that I think you're very disloyal. Without me, you wouldn't be where you are now. I had a lot of choice of who I have write the book, and I chose you, and I was very generous with you. I know that you gave a lot of lectures using the art of the deal. I could have sued you, but I didn't. My business has nothing to do with the art of the deal. That's not what I've been told. You're running for the President of the United States. The stakes here are high. Yes, they are, he said. Have a nice life. Trump hung up. Wow. Schwartz can understand why Trump feels stung, but he felt that he had to speak up before it was too late. As for Trump's anger towards him, he said, quote, I don't take it personally, because the truth is he didn't mean it personally. People are dispensable and disposable in Trump's world, unquote. If Trump is elected president, he warns, quote, the millions of people who voted for him and believe that he represents their interest will learn what anyone who deals closely with him already knows, that he couldn't care less about them, unquote. Folks, I know that most people aren't even going to make it here to the end. They're not even going to listen to this going on an hour. But I felt that I needed to read this. It's unfortunate that the kind of people who actually voted for Trump are not going to listen to the last line here. Trump considers you expendable. You're nothing to him. And it's, I have been dealing with the folks that are the most animate alt-right folks that there are online. The fools, the real fools who have put Trump in, who will see that he considers you dispensable. He considers your life dispensable. This man, Donald Trump, is going to drive this nation and this world to collapse, to destruction, which is inevitable. It needs to happen. But for those of you who seem to think that it's going to be a party, it's not. And how foolish is it for you to think that it's just going to be, it's going to be like some kind of movie, like you're the star of an action film. You're not. You're not. So many of you crave destruction, and I think that's the reason why Trump was elected. It was a suicide by proxy of this country. Folks, we got 4 days before he becomes president. It's not going to take long before he starts dismantling things that in the world, not just in this country, dismantling things that you're taking for granted right now. I do hope that at least a few people sit through this video, sit through the other videos that I do. I don't do them for anyone but you. I mean, I can find better things to do with my time than to read an article that takes an hour to read out loud for your benefit. I can think of a lot of better things I'd like to do than to be trolled by a bunch of half-witted children who have never experienced anything that is even close to life, to real life. But yet I continue to do it for now. And those of you who made it to the end, I'm not going to be doing this much longer. I'm not going to be making these videos much longer. I can't. There's no point in it. I've tried to warn you. I've tried to explain to you what's going on, and I've just been ignored. But I have all these videos, all of them, here, up in the cloud. This is going to be, eventually, my legacy, such as it is. A legacy that will lead to people, living, breathing people. This internet is not a living, breathing thing. It's not a real life form. It's an artificial life form, which is the major reason why I need to step back and stop doing this, and stop even engaging at all with people online, because they're not living, breathing people. And a good deal of people that even support me are on the fringes of sanity, quite frankly. Most of you probably haven't made it to the end here, so I'm just basically talking to myself. Early morning hours, talking into the darkness, just throwing my voice out there into the void. I've done this for a reason. I do it because I care. And that is something that is, wow, it's just unheard of anymore. Absolutely unheard of. It's a scary world. It's only going to get worse. I'm not frightened by it. The ironic thing is that the people that should be most frightened, the people that support this man, aren't frightened at all. They're too foolish to be frightened. Donald Trump is not a Republican. He's not a conservative. He has no ideology beyond self-aggrandizement. And he is going to lay a nuclear waste, figuratively and I believe literally, behind him. You have elected the man who is the beast. Been saying so since this time last year. I've told you who he is, that he would be elected. Now, as he rises to this power that is going to be godly power, you sit back and watch. You continue to doubt what I said, yet I continue to be right about these things. It comes from a place deep inside when you know the Spirit of wisdom, which is the divine feminine Sophia. That wisdom comes from deep within. It's a wellspring. And you either are attached to it or you're not. As Sophia herself put it, those who are of the Spirit know the Spirit. Those who are not do not. This is Shindo. Have a good Monday.